There is one photograph that has come to mean Chernobyl. A dark, glassy mass slumped across a basement floor like wax that cooled mid-pour. The elephant's foot. For decades it has been handed the same crown, in documentaries, in articles, in clips that flash it past you as a kind of monster. The most dangerous object in the entire ruined reactor. Get close, the story always says, and you have only minutes. Almost everything in that sentence is wrong, and the part that is right for the wrong reason. Because hidden inside Chernobyl is a far stranger truth. The single most radioactive mass under the reactor is not the one in the famous picture, and the single most dangerous thing in that building is not radioactive enough to set off much of a reading at all. It weighs almost nothing. You have never seen a photograph of it, because there is nothing to photograph. And it is the thing the people who actually worked in the ruins feared more than any glowing mass of melted fuel. To understand what it is, we have to take the legend apart, piece by piece. Start with the elephant's foot itself, because the myth around it has hardened into something almost as solid as the mass. When it first formed, in the chaos beneath the collapsing reactor, it was genuinely, catastrophically lethal. A few minutes beside it in those early days would have been a death sentence, no exaggeration. That part of the legend is true. The trouble is that the legend froze in place while the object did not. Radioactive material burns through its own intensity over time, and the fiercest part of that burn happens fast in the first months and years. By now, decades later, the mass in the photograph is a shadow of what it was. People have stood beside it for a short, carefully measured visit and walked away. The image that gets passed around as proof of instant death is, in reality, a man standing next to something that had already cooled enough to survive. So the first crack in the story is simple. The elephant's foot is famous for a danger it mostly used to have. But here is the deeper problem, the one that almost every retelling skips. We have been quietly treating two different words as if they were the same word. Radioactive and dangerous. They feel identical. They are not. And the gap between them is the whole point. How much harm a radioactive thing can do to you comes down to a few unglamorous factors. How strong it is, how far away you stand, and how long you stay. That middle one, distance, is where the famous mass quietly loses its menace. The energy pouring off a solid lump of melted fuel weakens sharply as it spreads outward, and a wall or a slab of poured concrete will swallow most of it before it ever reaches a body. This is exactly why the most radioactive mass in the whole complex is not the one people fear. It poured down into the lowest, sealed spaces of the building and cooled there, buried. It throws off a brutal amount of energy every second, and almost none of that energy will ever touch a human being because no human being can reach it. It is a monster locked in a room with no door, ferociously radioactive, almost entirely harmless simply because it is out of reach. Which tells you something important. If raw strength sealed behind concrete is survivable, then the real danger was never about the biggest number. It was about closeness, about a source and a body ending up in the same place. And there is one way to collapse that distance to zero, completely, permanently. A way that turns the rules inside out. You breathe it in. This is the distinction the famous photograph buries, and it is everything. There are two utterly different ways radiation reaches a person inside Chernobyl. The first comes from the outside. A mass sits over there, you stand over here. Energy crosses the gap, and stepping back makes you safer. The elephant's foot is mostly this kind of threat. Frightening, but fixed. It cannot follow you out of the building. The second way is the one almost nobody talks about, and it is the one that did the quiet killing. The source gets inside the body. A fragment of fuel far too small to see lifts into the air, settles on a glove, rides in on a single breath. And once it lodges in a lung, the logic flips. There is no distance left to retreat across, because the source is now pressed against living tissue from within, every hour for the rest of that person's life. You cannot step back from something that has become part of you. You cannot leave the room. You are the room. And now we can finally name the most dangerous thing in Chernobyl. It is not a mass. It is the dust. When the reactor tore itself open, it did not only leave behind those photogenic flows of hardened fuel, it ground a portion of its core into something far worse. Fine fuel particles, tiny grains of reactor fuel and fission products, light enough to drift on a draft, scattered through the building and out across the land around it. People who study the site have a name for the worst of them: hot particles. Specks you could not see if they were sitting on the back of your hand, each one a concentrated splinter of the reactor, waiting. And the cruel trick is that these particles are the weakest looking threat of all. Hold a counter near them and many barely register because the kind of energy they give off can be stopped by almost nothing. A sheet of paper, the dead outer layer of your own skin. From the outside, they read as practically harmless, and that is exactly why early on, some were dismissed as nothing to worry about. But that same feebleness becomes monstrous the instant the particle is inside, where there is no dead skin and no air to cross. All that energy, the energy that couldn't even travel a few centimeters through open space, is now poured straight into the soft dividing cells wrapped around it. The thing that looked like nothing becomes the thing that does not stop. This is what the liquidators were really up against. We picture them facing a visible, glowing enemy, and sometimes they were. But ask what the people working in and around the ruined block came to fear most, and again it is not the dramatic mass you could see and avoid. It is the contamination you could not, the grit on a surface, the haze in a beam of light, the particle that a loose mask or a careless breath could carry into a lung, where it would sit long after the shift ended, long after the person went home and forgot the day entirely. The threat was never really the sculpture in the photograph, it was the AIR in the room with it. And here the slow death of the famous mass turns from comfort into something darker. Over the decades, the most photographed flows of fuel have not just cooled. They have been quietly cracking themselves apart from the inside, the relentless energy locked in them turning solid, glassy rock towards something closer to crumbling sand. Which means the very object that built its legend on being a fearsome solid block is slowly becoming a source of exactly the thing that genuinely kills. Loose particles. The famous danger isn't fading with age, it is changing shape from something you could stand near into something you could breathe. So hold the two threats side by side, the way the people who actually work there had to learn to. On one side, the legend. Enormously radioactive once, solid, fixed, visible, and now calm enough to survive a careful glance. You can see it, measure it, decide not to linger, and leave whole. On the other side, a faint gray smear of dust along a pipe. It barely moves a counter, it looks like nothing at all. And it is, grain for grain, far more likely to be the thing that quietly ends a life, years later from the inside, long after anyone could connect the death to the day it began. Now go back to that photograph one final time. The man standing close to the famous mass is real. He was one of the people who went down into those depths to study what the reactor had become. And the reason the image exists at all is the entire argument folded into a single frame. By the time it was taken, the mass had calmed enough that a brief, measured visit was survivable. The picture looks like a portrait of a man beside the deadliest thing in Chernobyl. It is almost the opposite. He is standing beside the thing that could be seen and measured and survived. The thing that could truly have killed him doesn't appear in the picture at all. It is the faint haze in the air, the grit beneath his boots, the single particle waiting for one breath. That is the quiet mistake buried inside the most famous object in Chernobyl. We fear it because it looks like death, heavy, glistening, monstrous. But radiation has never cared what looks frightening. It cares about strength and distance and time. and above all, whether it can get inside you. The mass in the photograph mostly can't. It sits there sealed away, spending its terrible energy on concrete and empty air. The most dangerous object in Chernobyl weighs almost nothing. It makes almost no sound on a meter, and the day it finally kills someone, it will most likely have left the building years earlier, on the sole of a boot. Not great, not terrible, just the wrong monster. If you'd rather fear the right monster, stick around. There's a lot more buried under that reactor that the famous photographs never show you. Subscribe, and we'll keep going down.